A billionaire thought he could buy anything until a kind waitress taught him how to win the one thing money could never buy: his daughter's heart. The billionaire sat in the back of his black car, his phone glowing in his hand, his eyes glued to the screen. Numbers, contracts, and meetings filled his mind as always. To him, this was a normal day, but to his little daughter sitting beside him, it was something very rare. She had been waiting for weeks just to spend one morning with her father. He had promised he would take her out for breakfast, and although he looked distracted, she still clung to that promise like it was the most precious gift. When the car stopped in front of a small cafe, the girl's eyes lit up. It wasn't a place her father usually went to. He preferred expensive restaurants, quiet and private. But this morning he had chosen something different, maybe because it was close to one of his meetings. The cafe looked cozy, with flowers by the door and the smell of fresh bread floating out whenever the door opened. The little girl smiled wide and grabbed her father's hand, but he barely noticed as he typed a reply to someone important. She skipped ahead of him toward the entrance, her small shoes tapping quickly on the pavement. The ground was uneven, and her excitement made her careless. Just a few steps away from the door, her foot caught on a crack in the sidewalk, and before she could catch herself, she tumbled forward. Her knees hit the ground, and she let out a sharp cry that made a few heads turn. A small scrape appeared on her knee, bright red against her pale skin, and tears filled her eyes. The billionaire finally looked up from his phone, startled by the sound of his daughter's voice. He moved quickly, but before he could reach her, someone else was already kneeling beside the girl. It was a waitress from the cafe, wearing a simple apron and holding a tray she had set down quickly on the nearest table. She didn't hesitate. She crouched down, brushed the dirt gently from the girl's leg, and spoke in a soft, soothing tone. "Oh, sweetheart, that must have hurt," she said gently. Her voice was calm, the kind that wrapped around the child like a warm blanket. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, clean napkin. She dabbed at the scrape, careful not to press too hard. Then, as the little girl sniffled, the waitress leaned down and blew softly across the scrape just as a mother might. "There we go. All better," she whispered. The little girl hiccuped a laugh, surprised by the simple gesture. She stopped crying and instead leaned against the waitress's shoulder as though she had known her for years. The billionaire stood a few feet away, frozen. He had never seen his daughter calm down so quickly, not even when he tried. The child seemed to forget her pain in seconds, clinging tightly to the woman who was technically a stranger. "I'm fine now," the girl announced bravely, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. She looked up at the waitress with grateful eyes. "Thank you." The waitress smiled, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Anytime, little one. You're very brave." She stood slowly, helping the girl back to her feet, only then did she noticed the tall man standing silently behind them, his expensive suit sharply pressed, his watch gleaming in the morning light. Most people would have looked nervous in front of him. His name was known by many, his fortune even more so. The waitress simply gave him a polite nod. "She's okay now," she said simply. The billionaire opened his mouth, but no words came out. For a man who always knew exactly what to say in boardrooms, commanded entire rooms with just his voice, this moment left him completely silent. His daughter was still holding the waitress's hand, refusing to let go. When they finally entered the cafe, the billionaire followed quietly behind them. His daughter skipped happily, limping only a little, and pulled the waitress along, like an old friend. "Can we sit at our tables, Daddy?" the girl asked, her eyes wide with hope. The billionaire cleared his throat, trying to hide his surprise. "Of course," he answered, though his voice sounded different. Softer, they were seated at a corner table, and the waitress quickly brought water and menus. The little girl chatted endlessly, asking the waitress questions about her favorite foods, about her name, about whether she liked working at the cafe. The waitress answered patiently, laughing at the child's curiosity. The billionaire, however, barely spoke. He noticed things he had never paid attention to before. The way his daughter leaned toward the waitress, the way her eyes sparkled whenever the woman smiled, the way she seemed completely at ease. He also noticed how the waitress moved around the cafe. Even when other customers called her, even when she had to balance too many orders, she remained calm and gentle. There was nothing fake about her kindness. It was natural, effortless. The billionaire felt something strange stirring inside him. He had seen people act kind in order to impress him, to gain something from him. But this woman had no idea who he was when she first rushed to help his daughter. She didn't ask for anything in return. She didn't hesitate because of his status. She simply cared. As the meal went on, his daughter continued to giggle and talk, barely touching her food because she was too busy trying to make the waitress laugh. The billionaire listened quietly, realizing how different this morning felt compared to all the other times he had taken his daughter out. Usually she sat quietly, bored or shy, knowing her father's attention was somewhere else. But now she was alive, full of joy, and it had nothing to do with him. When the waitress came by to check on them, the little girl lifted her bandaged knee proudly. "Look, it doesn't even hurt anymore," she declared. "That's because you're strong," the waitress replied warmly. The billionaire's chest tightened. Strong. His daughter had been called many things in the newspapers, heiress. Little princess, even spoiled but never simply strong. The word sounded real, unpolished, and it meant more to him than any compliment money could buy. By the time they finished eating, the little girl begged to stay longer. Just to talk with the waitress, the billionaire agreed, though he had never lingered in a place like this before. He watched quietly as his daughter showed the waitress her favorite toy from her pocket and listened as the woman responded with genuine interest. Something inside him shifted. Though he couldn't quite explain it, he was a man who had built empires, who had learned to stay guarded, to never let emotions get in the way of decisions. Yet here he was, watching his daughter bond with a waitress, feeling a heaviness in his chest he couldn't control. When it was finally time to leave, his daughter hugged the waitress tightly, as if she didn't want to let go. "Can we come back tomorrow?" she pleaded. The billionaire looked at the waitress. She stood there with a polite smile, a little surprised at the child's affection, but not uncomfortable. He gave a short nod. "We'll see," he said, though in his heart he already knew the answer. As they walked back to the car, his daughter still chattering about the nice lady, the billionaire stayed quiet. His phone buzzed in his pocket, reminding him of all the important things waiting for him. But for the first time in a long time, those things didn't feel as important. He couldn't stop seeing the image of the waitress kneeling on the sidewalk, gently blowing on his daughter's knee, and the way his daughter had laughed through her tears. It was such a simple act, so small, yet it had touched him more deeply than anything else had in years, and as the car door closed behind him, he realized he couldn't push the thought away. The billionaire returned to the cafe the very next day, though he didn't say it out loud to anyone, not even to himself. He told his driver it was just a convenient place for breakfast before his meetings, but deep inside, he knew that wasn't. The reason? He had seen something yesterday that kept replaying in his mind. It wasn't just his daughter's laughter, though that sound had been rare and precious. It was the way she had clung to that waitress as if she had known her forever. It was the way the waitress had soothed her without hesitation, with no thought of money or who he was. That image had settled inside him like a seed. Now he couldn't stay away. His daughter, sitting beside him in the car, was practically bouncing in her seat. "Daddy, do you think she'll be there today?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. He pretended not to understand. "Who?" "The nice lady," she said quickly. "The one who fixed my knee. I want her to see that I'm all better now." She held out her leg proudly, the bandage still covering the scrape, though. The pain had long gone. He glanced at her and gave a small nod. "We'll see." But in his chest, he already knew the truth. He hoped she would be there too. When they entered the cafe, the smell of coffee and freshly baked bread wrapped around them. The same cozy atmosphere greeted them, with people chatting over there. Breakfasts, and the sound of plates clinking faintly in the background. And there she was, the waitress. She was carrying a tray of drinks to another table, her hair tied back neatly, moving quickly but carefully. The little girl spotted her immediately and ran forward. "K," she called out, lifting her leg proudly. "It doesn't hurt anymore." "It's..." Waitress turned, startled, but her face softened into a smile. "Well, that's wonderful news," she said warmly. She crouched down again, eye level with the girl. I told you. You were brave, didn't I? The little girl nodded eagerly. Daddy said we can sit in your spot again. She grabbed the waitress's hand without hesitation, pulling her toward an empty table. The billionaire, who usually preferred privacy and quiet, followed silently, letting his daughter lead the way. He sat down, and once again, the waitress was their server. As she set down the menus, the billionaire watched her more closely than before. He noticed how she seemed to juggle everything at once, smiling at one customer, remembering another's order, and still taking a moment to kneel beside his daughter with patience. There was no rush in her kindness. She didn't act this way because he was rich, or because she expected a large tip. He could see it now. This was just who she was. His daughter chattered endlessly, asking the waitress all sorts of questions. Do you like pancakes or waffles better? Do you get to eat here for free? Do you have kids? Do you like cats? The waitress laughed softly. That's a lot of questions, she said kindly. I like pancakes more. No, I don't get to eat for free. I don't have kids. And yes, I like cats. The little girl giggled. Satisfied with the answers, she leaned across the table and whispered loudly to her father, See, Daddy, she's nice. Isn't she nice? He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the directness of the question. Yes, he said simply, his eyes flickering toward the waitress. The woman smiled politely but didn't let the moment linger. She turned back to her duties, writing down their order, then moving swiftly to another table. Yet even when she was busy, she never seemed flustered. When a child at another table spilled juice, she was there in seconds, kneeling again, speaking softly, calming. The parent, as well as the child, the billionaire noticed every detail. His daughter, however, noticed something else. She noticed how her father kept glancing at the waitress whenever she walked by. Children were sharp that way. She smiled to herself but didn't say anything. Yet, when their food arrived, the little girl ate happily, but kept talking. She told the waitress about her toys, about the big garden at her home, about how she sometimes felt lonely in the big house. The billionaire stiffened at that part, but the waitress didn't judge. She only listened, nodding, as if the child's tease. Words mattered deeply. You're lucky to have such a big garden, the waitress said softly. Do you play outside often? The little girl shook her head. Not really. Daddy is always busy. But sometimes the gardener lets me help with flowers. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably. He'd never heard his daughter say this so plainly. He always thought she was fine, cared for by nannies, surrounded by toys. But the way she spoke now made him realize something was missing. Something only this stranger seemed to notice. After breakfast, he surprised himself by not rushing out. He stayed longer than usual, sipping his coffee slowly, watching his daughter laugh with the waitress. Time seemed different here, slower, quieter. For once, he wasn't counting the minutes until his next meeting. When they finally stood to leave, the little girl clung to the waitress again. Can we come back tomorrow too? She begged. The billionaire looked at the woman. She stood still, holding a stack of menus, her expression calm but slightly unsure. It wasn't every day a child of a billionaire asked to see her again. He gave a small nod. We'll see, he repeated, though once again he already knew the answer. As they walked out, the little girl skipped happily. I like her, Daddy, she said confidently. She makes me happy. The billionaire didn't reply right away. His thoughts were tangled. He couldn't remember the last time his daughter had spoken like that, with such openness, he realized. Uncomfortably, that she had never spoken about him in that way. The next day, he returned again. And again, after that, each time he told himself, it was just for his daughter's sake. She was the one who insisted on seeing the waitress. She was the one who begged to go back. But deep inside, he knew there was more to it. The waitress fascinated him. Not in the way people usually did, trying to impress or flatter him. No, she was different. She was grounded, kind, unshaken by his presence. She never once treated him like a billionaire. She treated him like a father, nothing more, nothing less. He found himself watching her closely. The way she tucked loose hair behind her ear when she was focused, the way she remembered small details about customers. Like how one old man preferred his coffee without sugar, but with a drop of honey. The way she laughed, easily, even when her hands were full and her feet must have been aching. And always, always, the way his daughter lit up around her. By the end of that week, his daughter was talking about the waitress nonstop. She told her. Toys about her. She drew pictures of herself holding hands with the nice lady. She even asked her father if the waitress could come visit their house one day. That request startled him more than anything. It made him realize just how much his daughter longed for connection. For warmth, for something she didn't feel she had at home. And though he didn't say it aloud, he began to long for it too. The billionaire had always been a man of habits. His mornings started with phone calls, meetings, and tight schedules, but lately, those habits had begun to shift. His driver noticed it first. Instead of being dropped at the glass towers of his company, the man now asked to be taken to the small cafe almost every morning. The reason was obvious, though he never said it out loud. His daughter's excitement each day was enough of an excuse, but deep down he knew it wasn't only for her. Something about that place, about the waitress who had comforted his child, kept pulling him back. The girl seemed happier than she had in months. She would wake up early, rushing through her breakfast at home just so she could have another breakfast. At the cafe, she carried little drawings in her small hands, eager to show the waitress. One day she drew the three of them together, herself, her father, and the waitress standing under a big sun with smiles on their faces. The billionaire didn't know how to react when she proudly presented it to him. He just stared at the drawing longer than he meant to. The waitress welcomed them each time with the same warmth as before. She never acted surprised that they returned again and again. She treated them like any other customers, though the little girl often got extra attention because of her endless questions. The billionaire found himself watching more than speaking. He had spent years observing markets, investments, and people. In business, but now, his eyes followed something much simpler, the way the waitress tied her apron. The way she remembered his daughter's favorite muffin flavor. The way she bent down to listen closely when the girl spoke. It was during one of these visits that his daughter opened up more than ever before. She was nibbling on her toast when she looked at the waitress and said, "I miss Mommy sometimes. Daddy doesn't talk about her much." The billionaire froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. The cafe noises seemed to fade around him. He had never expected his daughter to say such a thing in public, let alone to a stranger. The waitress, however, didn't flinch. She sat down gently at the edge of their booth, her eyes kind. "I bet you do," she said softly. "Mommies are very special. What do you miss most about her?" The girl thought for a moment, then said, "She used to sing to me at night, and she always kissed my forehead before I went to sleep." Her voice cracked slightly, and she looked down at her plate. The billionaire's chest tightened. He had buried those memories so deep that he hardly let himself think about them anymore. He had believed avoiding the subject was a way to protect his daughter, but seeing her speak so openly now, he realized it wasn't protection, it was avoidance. The waitress nodded gently. "That's a beautiful memory," she said. "Do you want to know something? Sometimes, when people we love aren't here anymore, we can still feel them. Not in the same way, but in little things like songs, or the way the wind feels, or the smell of flowers they liked."
Nice.
The girl's eyes widened, curious. "Really?" "Really," the waitress said with a small smile. "It's like they leave pieces of love behind for us to find." The girl smiled faintly and leaned against her father. He sat stiff, not sure what to do, until he slowly put his arm around her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she didn't pull away. That night, when he tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, can you sing me something? Just like Mommy used to?" His throat closed up. He hadn't sung in years, not since his wife's death. But looking at his daughter's hopeful face, he tried. His voice cracked, low and uneven, but she smiled anyway. That smile stayed with him long after she fell asleep. The visits to the cafe became their routine. Each time, he noticed new details about the waitress. He learned her name. He learned that she worked long shifts because her mother was ill and needed medicine. He learned that she had once studied at a university, but had to leave to help her family. She never told these things with bitterness, only with simple honesty. He found himself thinking about her even when he wasn't at the cafe. In the middle of meetings, he would suddenly remember her laugh. During late dinners with clients, he would picture how she leaned down to talk to his daughter. It unsettled him. He was a man who had always been in control of his mind and emotions, yet here he was, distracted by someone who wasn't part of his carefully built world. Meanwhile, his daughter's bond with the waitress only grew. She began talking less to her nannies and more about the cafe. She would say, "Daddy, she listens to me," or "She likes my stories." Each time, the billionaire felt a sting of guilt. He realized how many of those moments he had missed. How many times had he brushed off her questions because of an important call? How many times had she wanted to tell him something, but he wasn't really there? One afternoon, when the cafe was less busy, he found himself speaking with the waitress. More directly. "You seem to have a way with children," he said, his voice low as if he wasn't used to compliments. She shrugged lightly. "I just listen. Most people don't realize that's all kids really want, someone to listen." Her words struck him harder than he expected. Listening. It sounded so simple, yet it was something he hadn't done enough of, not with his daughter, not even with himself. Later that week, his daughter scraped her hand while playing in the cafe's little corner where plants were kept. She gasped, her eyes filling with tears, and for a moment, the billionaire panicked. He looked around for the waitress, expecting her to rush over as she had before. But this time, something inside him pushed him forward. He knelt down, took his daughter's small hand in his, and remembered what he had seen. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly. He blew gently on the scrape just as the waitress had done. "See, it's not so bad." His daughter blinked at him, surprised. Then she smiled and wrapped her arms around his neck. "You did it like her," she whispered. The billionaire's heart swelled. For the first time in years, he felt like he had given his daughter what she truly needed. Not money, not gifts, but comfort. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't just the act itself. It was the realization that he had been learning from the waitress without even realizing it. She had shown him what it meant to be present, to care in small ways. She had reminded him that being a father wasn't about providing everything, but about being there when it mattered most. The cracks in his world grew wider. He began canceling some meetings just to spend more time with his daughter. He started asking her about her day, truly listening to her. Answers. And every time he did, he saw the change in her, how she trusted him a little more. How her eyes sparkled like they did in the cafe, but at the same time, he felt something else growing inside him, something he wasn't ready to admit. His admiration for the waitress was no longer just about what she gave his daughter, it was about her. Her strength, her kindness, her honesty. She had touched both of them in ways he hadn't expected. And though he tried to ignore it, he couldn't. She had become the thread pulling him closer to a version of himself he didn't know existed. The billionaire was not used to being refused. In his world, if he offered help, people took it immediately. They admired him, flattered him, and accepted whatever he gave. But the waitress was different. The first time he quietly tried to give her money, she shook her head and pushed his hand back, her expression firm but respectful. "I don't want your charity," she said softly. "I can take care of myself. I'm not here to be bought." Her words stayed with him like an echo he couldn't escape. No one had ever spoken to him that way before. For a man who controlled companies, who made decisions that affected thousands, it was strange to meet someone who didn't bow to his wealth. It frustrated him, but it also fascinated him. He tried again in another way. One morning, while his daughter played with crayons at the cafe table, he asked, "Do you ever think of going back to school?" The waitress paused, balancing a tray. "In her hand, of course," she said. "But it's not possible right now. My mother needs me, and I need the job." He leaned back, his voice quiet but serious. "If money is the problem, I could—" She cut him off before he could finish. "It's not about money," she said firmly. "It's about responsibility. My life isn't as simple as just walking back into a classroom." He was silent, caught off guard again. She wasn't rude, but she was clear. She didn't want him to fix her problems with a check. For someone like him, that was unusual. Money had always been his solution to everything. Yet here she was, showing him it wasn't enough. Later that same day, When his daughter tugged his sleeve and asked if he could take her to the park instead of going straight home, he hesitated. He had calls waiting, contracts to sign. But he remembered what the waitress had said.
It wasn't money children needed.
It was time, so he took her to the park. At first he felt awkward. He sat stiffly on the bench, his phone buzzing in his pocket while his daughter ran to the swings. But when she called out, "Push me, Daddy," he put the phone away. Slowly he stood and pushed her gently. Her laughter filled the air, bright and unrestrained, and something inside him loosened. He had forgotten how that sound felt. The next day he tried again. When she showed him a drawing, instead of just nodding distractedly, he asked her about it. "Why did you draw the sun so big?" he asked. "Because it makes everything bright," she answered happily. And when she told him about her favorite game, he listened carefully, even if he didn't fully understand. For the first time, he began to realize what the waitress meant about listening. It wasn't hard. It just required patience, something he had rarely given. His daughter noticed the change, too. She began to smile more around him. She leaned on his arm while they walked. She laughed at his clumsy attempts to play games, and she hugged him more often without hesitation. He felt like he was rediscovering her, piece by piece, like she was a treasure he had been too blind to see before. But he knew it wasn't only his effort. The waitress was still there, quietly guiding him without even realizing it. She never lectured him, never told him outright what to do, but her example was enough. He watched the way she knelt to listen to his daughter's stories, the way she laughed at silly jokes, the way she treated every child who came into the cafe as though they mattered. He copied her gestures awkwardly at first, but slowly they became natural. One afternoon, his daughter stumbled again while running around the cafe. This time, before the waitress could move, he was already kneeling beside her. He took her small hand, blew softly on the scrape, and whispered, "See? It's not so bad. You're okay." The girl's eyes widened. For a moment, she just stared at him, then her lips curled into a smile. She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "You did it like her." His chest tightened at the words. It was true. He had learned it from the waitress, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that his daughter finally looked at him. With the same trust she gave the waitress, for the first time, he felt like a real father. The waitress saw it too. She watched from a distance, her eyes soft with approval. She didn't interfere, didn't take over. She simply smiled, and that smile told him everything. He was on the right path. That evening, when he sat in his office, staring at contracts, he couldn't focus. He kept remembering his daughter's hug, her words, the pride in her voice. For years, he had measured success in numbers, in profits, in headlines. But that small moment had felt bigger than any business victory. The next time he saw the waitress, he tried again to thank her. "You've helped my daughter more than you know," he said quietly while she cleared the table. She shook her head. "I didn't do anything special. She just needed someone to notice her." Him again. She never took credit, never sought recognition. But he knew the truth. Without her, he might never have changed. Days turned into weeks, and his efforts grew stronger. He began to leave work earlier, sometimes surprising his daughter with trips to the park or ice cream. At home, he read her bedtime stories, even when he stumbled over the voices. She laughed at his attempts, and he laughed too. Slowly, their bond grew. Yet every step reminded him of the waitress. She was the one who had unknowingly guided him here. She was the one who had shown him the importance of small gestures, of presence. He admired her strength, her patience, her refusal to let life harden her. He also began to notice something else, feelings he hadn't expected. At first, it was just respect. Then it became admiration. And now it was something deeper. Something he was almost afraid to name. Whenever he saw her, his chest felt heavier, his thoughts tangled. He didn't know what to do with it. He had been alone for so long, burying himself in work, convincing himself that love was behind him. But now, the possibility whispered in the back of his mind. For now, though, he focused on his daughter. One night, as he tucked her into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and said, "Daddy, you're different now." He froze. Different how? You listen to me, you play with me, make me laugh. I like this daddy better." She smiled, her eyes closing slowly. Tears burned at the back of his eyes, something he hadn't felt in years. He leaned down and kissed her forehead just as her mother once had. "I like this daddy better too," he whispered. The change was real. And though he didn't say it out loud, he knew exactly who had made it possible. The billionaire had changed in ways he could hardly believe. He was no longer the distant man who counted every minute, who measured his life in meetings and contracts. He now noticed small things: his daughter's laugh, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she felt safe and happy. Every morning he woke with a thought of her. Every evening he went to bed replaying the moments they had shared that day. One morning, as usual, they went to the cafe. The little girl ran ahead, waving eagerly at the waitress. The billionaire followed slowly, a soft smile on his face. She knelt down to greet his daughter, as always, and the child hugged her tightly. The billionaire watched quietly, but this time he noticed something new. He felt a warmth he had not felt before. He realized he did not want this moment to end. His daughter tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, sit here with us today?" she said, pointing to a table near the waitress. He complied, and as he sat, he felt the unusual sensation of wanting to be close, of wanting to be part of this small circle that had become so important to him. As they ate, the little girl chattered endlessly, telling stories about her toys, her drawings, and her day at home. The billionaire listened, asking questions, laughing at her jokes. He was no longer distracted by calls or emails. The world outside the cafe felt distant and irrelevant compared to this moment. The waitress watched them quietly, her smile calm and gentle. She didn't intervene, but her presence was comforting. The billionaire noticed how effortlessly she balanced work and kindness. She seemed unaffected by his wealth, by his status, and that only made him admire her more. Her sincerity was something he had rarely seen in his life. When his daughter accidentally dropped her napkin on the floor, she looked at the waitress to pick it up. The billionaire, without thinking, reached down and handed it to her himself. His daughter's eyes widened in surprise, and she clapped her hands. "You did it like her," she exclaimed. The billionaire laughed softly, feeling a strange mix of pride and humility. The waitress's influence had changed him more than he could have imagined. He had learned how to be present, how to care without controlling, and how to listen with patience. These were lessons he had never received from his own father, lessons that money could never buy. Over the next few weeks, his bond with his daughter strengthened even more. He began taking her on walks, reading bedtime stories, and spending long hours simply talking. He discovered parts of her personality he had never noticed: her curiosity, her sensitivity, her sense of humor. And with every passing day, he realized he was falling in love with the little moments, the small gestures, and the trust she placed in him. But alongside these changes, he could not ignore another truth. He found himself thinking about the waitress constantly. Her laugh, the way she bent down to speak to his daughter, the quiet strength in her eyes. These images stayed in his mind long after they left the cafe. He tried to dismiss the feelings, telling himself that it was inappropriate, that he was only grateful for her kindness. But his heart refused to listen. One afternoon, after they finished their meal, he walked outside with his daughter. She was skipping ahead, holding her favorite toy. The waitress came out to see them off, smiling warmly. The billionaire hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything. You've given my daughter and me something we didn't even realize we were missing." The waitress smiled gently. "Glad I could help," she said. "You've done all the hard work yourself. You just needed to open your heart a little." Her words struck him deeply. She was right. Had guided him without commanding, taught him without lecturing, and inspired him without knowing it. He felt a surge of gratitude, but also something more: a desire to be close to her, not just as a friend, but as someone who mattered in his life. That evening at home, he watched his daughter play with her toys. She was laughing freely, her eyes sparkling with joy. He realized that for the first time, he had a true sense of fulfillment. Money, power, and influence had never made him feel this way. It was the simple acts of love, trust, and care that had changed him entirely. Days passed, and the billionaire found himself returning to the cafe, not just for his daughter, but to see the waitress as well. He admired her quietly, never wanting to impose, yet he could not deny the feelings growing within him. He began to notice the small gestures she made, the way she remembered his daughter's favorite seat, the way she encouraged her to try new foods, the way she laughed at his clumsy attempts to play games. Each gesture filled him with admiration and something deeper he could no longer ignore. One morning, as they left the cafe, his daughter tugged at his hand.
"Daddy, she makes me so happy,"
she said softly. The billionaire looked at her, his chest tightening. "I know, sweetheart," he replied, his voice low. "I know." He realized then that the waitress had done more than brighten his daughter's world. She had also opened his heart, teaching him to be a father who could truly love, to be present in the moments that mattered most, and to appreciate the simple joys of life. He understood that his feelings for her were real and that he could no longer ignore them. The next day, he returned to the cafe with a purpose. This time, he approached her directly. "I want to thank you properly," he said. "You've changed our lives, and I can't stop thinking about how kind and brave you are." The waitress looked at him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I didn't do it for you or your daughter," she said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. That's all anyone can do." "I know," he replied, taking a deep breath. "But I want you to know how much it means to us. You've given my daughter a smile I haven't seen in years. You've given me a chance to be the father I should have been all along." Her eyes softened, and for the first time the billionaire felt a connection that went beyond words. He realized that love, respect, and trust were built slowly, through actions rather than words or money. She had shown him that, and now he wanted to take the next step. As he watched his daughter skip ahead, laughing freely, he felt a sense of peace he had never known. His wealth could build empires by anything he desired, but it could not create the bond he now had with his daughter. That bond had been nurtured by kindness, patience, and genuine care, qualities that the waitress had modeled every day. Later that evening, he sat alone, thinking about how much had changed. He had learned that life's most valuable lessons were often the simplest: listening, being present, showing care, and embracing love when it appeared. He knew he had fallen for the waitress not just because of her actions, but because she had awakened the part of him that he had long ignored, part that could love deeply and freely. The billionaire made a silent promise to himself. He would continue to be the father his daughter needed. He would continue to cherish every small moment with her. And one day, when the time was right, he would let the waitress know just how much she had come to mean to both of them. The little girl skipped back toward him, holding her drawing. "Daddy, look, I drew us together." He looked at the picture and smiled, feeling a warmth that no amount of money could ever buy. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Just like us." And in that moment, he realized something he had never truly understood before. Wealth could build an empire, but love's simple, honest, and patient love could build a family. He looked across the cafe, catching the waitress's eyes. She smiled, and in that smile, he saw everything he had been searching for: kindness, courage, and the quiet power to change a life. He didn't need words. He didn't need promises. He knew that from that day forward, their lives would never be the same. And for the first time in years, he felt truly, completely happy.